I just served my wife of 22 years with a lawsuit for $6 million. She thinks it's a joke. Her family is probably laughing right now, gathered in the living room of the house I built with my own two hands. They think the man with grease under his fingernails is too simple to fight back. They are wrong. I know this must sound crazy, coming from a man who, just a month ago, was spinning his wife around the kitchen, celebrating a $12 million lottery win we thought would solve all our problems. But that shared dream turned into her private fortune overnight. She and her family threw me out with nothing but a bag of clothes and a $10,000 insult. What they didn't know is that they left me with something far more valuable. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions about this story in the comments. Because this isn't just a story about money, it's about a saved voicemail, a forgotten $20 bill, and the moment a good man decides he's had enough. They're about to learn that my memory is longer than their greed. For 22 years, my days began with the same two smells: the dark, bitter aroma of brewing coffee and the faint, metallic scent of motor oil that never quite washed off my hands, no matter how hard I scrubbed. That combination was the smell of my life, the smell of providing. I was always the first one up, usually around 5:30 a.m., when the sky outside our bedroom window was still a deep, hazy blue, and the only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator. The linoleum floor in the kitchen was always cool under my bare feet as I'd start the coffee maker, a simple drip machine we'd gotten as a wedding gift in 1999. While it gurgled to life, I'd stand by the window overlooking the backyard, watching the world wake up. Our house wasn't big, but it was solid. I knew every creak in the floorboards, every spot where the paint was starting to peel. On the wall next to the fridge, there was a series of pencil marks charting our kids' heights over the years, starting from when they were toddlers and ending the day our daughter Lily left for college. My mug was the one with the small chip on the rim, a casualty of a playful shove from Sarah back when we were still young and foolish enough to wrestle in the kitchen. It was an ugly thing, a faded green with a corporate logo from a company that went out of business a decade ago, but it was mine. It held exactly 2 cups of coffee, the perfect amount to get me going. I'd sit in the old armchair by the window, the one with the springs that groaned like an old man settling in for a nap, and sip my coffee in the quiet stillness of the morning. That was my time. The rest of the house was just as full of memories. The porch swing I'd assembled the day our son Jake was born, its chains now rusted but still strong. We'd spent countless summer evenings out there, listening to the crickets and watching the fireflies, Sarah's head resting on my shoulder. Her lavender garden, which ran along the side of the house, would release its calming scent into the warm air. That scent was her. It was the smell of home, of peace. Inside, the hardwood floor in the living room had a worn circular patch near the stereo, a permanent ghost of the night we danced to our wedding song on our 10th anniversary, laughing until we couldn't breathe. Every object, every imperfection told a story of our shared journey. My auto shop, David's Auto, was just a 15-minute drive away. It wasn't much to look at. A simple 2-bay garage with concrete floors and walls lined with tools I'd been collecting since I was a teenager, but it was mine. The air inside always smelled of gasoline, grease, and hard work. I loved the feel of a solid steel wrench in my hand, the challenge of diagnosing a sputtering engine, the satisfaction of hearing it roar back to life. My customers were my neighbors, people I'd known for years. They trusted me. They knew I'd charge them a fair price and do the job right. Those long hours, the 70-hour weeks during the busy season, paid for our daughter's college tuition, for the family vacations to the lake every July, for the lavender bushes Sarah planted with such care. My hands were always calloused, my fingernails permanently outlined in black, but they built our life. When I'd get home, usually around 7 p.m., the house would smell different. It smelled of her. Sometimes it was the rich scent of the tomato sauce she made from scratch, simmering on the stove. Other times it was just the clean, earthy smell of the garden clinging to her clothes. She'd be pulling the last of the weeds or trimming her roses, and I'd come up behind her and wrap my arms around her waist. We were a team. She ran the house and I ran the shop. It was a simple, unspoken agreement that had worked for over 2 decades. Our dreams were small and practical. Pay off the mortgage by the time I turned 60. Maybe buy a small boat for fishing on the lake. Watch our kids build happy lives of their own. We never asked for much. We didn't need much. We had each other. Every beam in that house, every nail, every floorboard, felt like a piece of me. I had built our world with my own two hands, and I believed it was indestructible. I thought our love was the foundation holding it all up. It turns out it was just the first thing to crumble. The first week after the win was a blur of pure, unadulterated joy. We were like two kids who'd been handed the keys to a candy store. We stayed up late, spread out on the living room floor with travel brochures and car magazines, dreaming out loud. We talked about a trip to Italy, about buying a small cabin by the lake, about finally replacing my rusty 1998 Ford F-150. We were a unit, a team, and the word "we" was the most beautiful sound in the world. Then, on Saturday morning, a sleek black SUV pulled into our gravel driveway. Sarah's mother, Eleanor, and her brother, Mark, had arrived. I hadn't seen them in over a year, and their sudden appearance felt less like a celebration and more like an inspection. The change in the house was immediate. Eleanor walked through the rooms with a faint, tight smile, her eyes scanning everything from the worn armchair to the chipped paint on the windowsill. "Oh, Sarah, darling," she said, running a manicured finger over the dusty top of a bookshelf. "It's so wonderful that you'll finally be able to afford a proper home." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a verdict. Mark, who worked in finance and always dressed like he was about to close a hostile takeover, just smirked. He looked at me, at my work boots by the door and my faded jeans, and his gaze was heavy with the condescension I knew so well. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a shove. "Well, David," he said, his voice slick, "looks like your days of crawling under cars are finally over." I tried to laugh it off, but a knot of unease began to form in my stomach. Sarah, who would normally have defended our life and our home, just gave a nervous little laugh and busied herself with making them tea. That afternoon, the three of them sat at the kitchen table, their voices low and conspiratorial. I was in the living room, trying to read the paper, but their words drifted over. I heard phrases like investment portfolios, tax shelters, and asset protection. The word "we" was gone. It was replaced with my money, my decision, what I should do. Every time Sarah said "I," it felt like a small paper cut on my heart. I looked over at her, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. She was already drifting away from me, pulled into their orbit of shiny, cold numbers. The next morning, the disconnect became painfully clear. I was having my coffee in my chipped green mug, sitting in my armchair by the window, my one sacred ritual. Eleanor walked in, her silk robe rustling. "Goodness, Sarah, you simply must get rid of all this old clutter," she announced, gesturing vaguely at my mug. "We'll go to Williams-Sonoma and get you a proper set of dishes." I waited for Sarah to say something, to defend the simple object that had been part of our mornings for 22 years. I expected her to say, "Mom, that's David's favorite mug." Instead, she just nodded. "You're right," she said, not even looking at me. "It's time for an upgrade." I held the warm ceramic in my hands, the small chip pressing into my thumb, and for the first time, I felt like a guest in my own house. The mug suddenly felt like a relic from a life that was already over. The final crack appeared that evening. We were all on the porch, the scent of Sarah's lavender garden filling the air. Mark was swirling a glass of expensive wine he'd brought. "First thing on the agenda, Sarah, is to sell this place," he declared. "The land is probably worth more than the house. And David, you should sell that greasy little garage of yours. Put the money into a real investment." I felt a flare of anger, hot and sharp. "The shop is my life's work," I said, my voice low and steady. "And this house is our home. I built that porch swing with my own hands." Mark let out a short, ugly laugh. "Sentimental nonsense," he scoffed. I looked at Sarah, pleading with my eyes for her to stand with me, to be my partner. She just sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion and annoyance. "David, don't be so dramatic," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "Mark is right. It's just a house. It's just a garage. Things are different now." The way she said it, so dismissive and final, told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was just part of the old clutter she was ready to throw away. The breaking point didn't come with a crash of thunder, but with a sterile, artificial scent of lemon cleaner. It was 3 days after the argument on the porch, 3 days of walking on eggshells in a house that was no longer mine. The comforting smell of lavender from the garden was gone, overpowered by a chemical fog that seemed to erase every trace of our life together. Sarah had hired a cleaning service. They had scrubbed and polished away every familiar scent, every ghost of a memory, leaving behind a cold, glossy showroom. I found my chipped green mug in a cardboard box by the back door, labeled Donations. I took it out and placed it back on the counter, a small act of defiance in a war. One didn't even know I was fighting. That evening, she called me into the kitchen. The warmth was gone from the room. The overhead light felt harsh and clinical, reflecting off the newly waxed floor. Sarah was sitting at the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her posture was ramrod straight, like a student about to give a presentation. Mark wasn't in the room, but his presence lingered like a bad cologne. I could feel his influence in the rigid set of her jaw, in the cold, practiced emptiness of her eyes. She didn't ask me to sit. She simply began speaking, her voice flat and devoid of any emotion, as if she were reading a corporate memo. "David, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've come to a decision." She paused, took a shallow breath, and continued. "For this next chapter to begin cleanly, I think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay. Starting tonight." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and glittering like shards of glass. I stared at her, trying to find the woman I'd shared my life with. The woman whose head had rested on my shoulder on that porch swing for countless nights. She wasn't there. My own voice felt like it was coming from a great distance. "Somewhere else? Sarah, this is our home." I looked around the kitchen, at the pencil marks on the wall charting our kids' growth, at the small crack in the ceiling I'd been meaning to fix. "What are you talking about?" She flinched at the word our. It was the only flicker of emotion I saw. "It's not our home anymore, David. It's my property now. The lottery winnings are legally in my name, and I will be selling this house." She gestured to an envelope on the table. "I'm not leaving you with nothing. There's a check in here for $10,000. It should be enough for you to get a deposit on an apartment and get yourself settled. $10,000. For 22 years of my life. For the Mustang I sold to pay for her mother's cancer treatment. For the endless 70-hour weeks that paid for our daughter's education." The number was so small, so insulting, it barely registered. It was a tip, not a settlement. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. All the fight seemed to drain out of me, replaced by an immense, glacial calm. The blood in my veins felt like ice water. I looked past her, toward the hallway, and saw him. Mark was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. He had been listening the whole time, coaching her from the sidelines. He caught my eye and gave a slight, mocking nod, as if to say, "Game over." And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't Sarah. This was them. This was their greed, their condescension, their victory. My love for her, the life we had built, was just collateral damage in their hostile takeover. I looked back at Sarah, her gaze dropped to the table, unable to meet mine. She couldn't even look at the man she was discarding like a piece of old furniture. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. I let it hang there, a testament to everything she was throwing away. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady and clear, betraying none of the chaos raging inside me. "I understand." That was all I said. I turned without another word and walked to our bedroom. I pulled a duffel bag from the top of the closet and began to pack. I took my work clothes, a few pairs of jeans, my shaving kit. I left the suit she'd bought me, the watch she gave me for my 50th birthday. I looked at the framed photo on the nightstand, the one from our wedding day in 1999. Her smile was so genuine then. I left it there. As I walked back through the living room, bag in hand, I heard Mark's voice, low and dripping with scorn. "See? I told you he'd fold. He doesn't have a spine." Sarah let out a small, nervous laugh, a sound that cut me deeper than any of her rehearsed words. I didn't turn around. I didn't say goodbye. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cool night air. The lock clicked behind me with a sound of absolute finality. Standing on the porch I had built, I looked at the house one last time. It was no longer a home. It was just a building full of strangers. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not the end. It was the beginning. I drove to a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and carpets that smelled of stale cigarettes and regret. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the springs groaning under my weight, and let the silence of the room press in on me. The anger was still there, a hot, solid core in my chest, but it wasn't wild anymore. It had cooled, hardened into something else, something focused. I looked down at my hands. The nails were clean for the first time in decades, but I could still see the faint, dark lines etched into the skin, a permanent map of my life's work. These hands had built a home, fixed hundreds of engines, and held my wife when she cried. They were the hands of a builder, a fixer. They were patient hands, methodical hands. Sarah and Mark had only ever seen the grease. They never understood the precision required to rebuild a transmission or the logic needed to diagnose a faulty engine. They saw a simple man. They were about to learn that simple doesn't mean stupid. I didn't yell. I didn't throw the phone against the peeling wallpaper. I simply replayed the voicemail, listening to my own voice from another lifetime, calm and unsuspecting. The $20 for the lottery is on the counter. Could you grab a ticket on your way home? Please use our numbers. Our numbers. Our $20. Our dream. It was all there, preserved in a 1-minute recording. I thought about the $10,000 check inside the envelope on the nightstand. An insult. A dismissal. They thought they could buy my silence. Buy my entire life, for the price of a used car. They had calculated my worth, and found it negligible. That was their first mistake. Their second was believing I would simply accept their valuation. I picked up the settlement offer, the paper crisp and cold in my hands. I turned it over to the blank side. With a cheap pen from the motel desk, I started to write. I didn't write a letter full of rage or pain. I wrote a list. 1. Voicemail from Friday, October 15th, 7:12 p.m. 2. ATM withdrawal receipt, $20 from the bank on Main Street, dated October 15th, 8:30 a.m. 3. Testimony from Tom at the garage, who heard me say I was leaving money for the ticket. My mind, which usually spent its days mapping out engine schematics, was now mapping out a legal strategy. Every detail, every memory, became a potential piece of evidence. The sale of my Mustang in 2017 to pay for Eleanor's medical bills. I had the bank transfer records. The years she hadn't worked while I paid the mortgage and all the bills, I had the tax returns to prove it. For 22 years, I had been the provider, the steady foundation. They thought that because I was quiet, I was weak. They mistook my patience for passivity. They were about to discover the difference. I looked at my list, then at the phone. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. It was beating with a slow, steady rhythm. The rhythm of an engine that has just been perfectly tuned. They would not see this coming. The first call I made wasn't to a friend or to my kids. It was to a man named Arthur Henderson, a lawyer whose office was in a modest brick building downtown, right across from the old courthouse. His name had been given to me by a customer, a retired judge, whose brakes I'd been fixing for a decade. Henderson's not flashy, he'd told me once, but he's as solid as a block of iron. That's what I needed. Not flash, iron. I used the $10,000 check from Sarah to open a new bank account. The teller looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The first withdrawal I made was for $5,000, a cashier's check made out to Henderson Law. It was half of everything I had in the world, and it felt like the best investment I'd ever made. Mr. Henderson's office smelled of old books and freshly brewed black coffee. He was a man in his late 60s, with a kind, wrinkled face and hands that, despite his profession, looked like they had seen their share of hard work. He didn't rush me. He just listened, his pen occasionally scratching a note on a yellow legal pad. I told him everything, my voice low and even. When I was done, I took out my phone and played the voicemail from October 15th. I watched his face as my own voice filled the quiet room. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with focus. He played it a second time. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice a calm baritone, "this is more than a good start. This establishes a clear pattern of shared financial enterprise. The lottery was a joint venture, regardless of whose name is on the check." He laid out the plan in clear, simple terms, like a mechanic explaining an engine repair. First, we would file a petition to freeze 50% of the assets, which amounted to exactly $6 million. This would prevent Sarah from moving, spending, or hiding the money. The petition had to be filed by December 1st to get on the court's docket before the holidays. Second, we would formally reject her settlement offer of $10,000. He called it insulting and punitive. Third, we would begin the discovery process, officially requesting financial records, depositions, and all communications related to the lottery winnings. "They will fight this," he warned me, leaning forward. "They will try to paint you as a bitter, greedy man. Our job is to prove you were a partner. We do that with facts, not feelings." He handed me a list. "I need bank statements from the last 5 years, tax returns for the last 10, and any documentation you have of significant financial contributions you made to the family, especially those that benefited her or her relatives." The next week was a methodical scavenger hunt through the wreckage of my life. I started at the bank, a cold, impersonal place with marble floors that echoed with every footstep. I requested the statement for October 2021. There it was, clear as day on a crisp white page. ATM withdrawal minus $20 Main Street branch. October 15th, 8:30 a.m. It was a small number, but it felt as solid as a signed confession. Then I dug deeper. I requested the records for March 2017. I found the wire transfer receipt for $28,500, sent directly to the hospital where Eleanor had her surgery. The memo line, which I had written myself, simply read, "For Mom." That was the money from my 1968 Mustang, my father's car. I had sold my one tangible link to him to save her mother, and they had repaid me with a $10,000 check. The irony was so bitter it felt like acid in my throat. My next stop was my shop. Pushing open the door and smelling that familiar mix of oil, metal, and gasoline was like taking my first full breath in weeks. This place was real. It was mine. I spent an entire afternoon in my cramped back office, surrounded by the comforting clutter of invoices and repair manuals. I pulled out every tax return since 2002. They told a clear story. For 22 years, David's Auto was the sole source of income listed under our joint filings. Sarah was listed as a dependent for 12 of those years. I found the loan documents for our mortgage, with only my signature as the borrower. I found the receipts for our daughter Lily's tuition payments, all drawn from my business account. The numbers didn't lie. They painted a portrait of a man who had spent his entire adult life providing, building, and supporting. Every greasy dollar had gone into that family, into that house. I took the stack of documents, nearly 3 inches thick, back to Mr. Henderson's office on November 28th, 2 days before our deadline. He went through them page by page, his only comment an occasional, quiet, When he was finished, he stacked them into a neat pile and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "David," he said, "this is ironclad. Their narrative of you being some kind of freeloader just evaporated." That afternoon, I sat in his conference room and signed the official petition. My hand was steady. Document CV 2100845. A lawsuit against Sarah Miller for the sum of $6 million, citing the dissolution of a long-term financial partnership. There was no anger in my signature, no rage. Just the quiet, firm pressure of a man tightening a bolt until it holds fast. I left his office and drove to a small, one-bedroom apartment I had rented with the remaining $4,000. It was sparse, with white walls and a view of a brick building, but it was quiet, and it was mine. I unpacked my duffel bag, placing my few clothes in the closet. The last thing I took out was my old green mug, the one with the chip on the rim. I had gone back to the house one afternoon when I knew they would be out and retrieved the donations box from the curb. The mug was right on top. I washed it in my new sink, filled it with coffee from a cheap drip machine, and sat at the small kitchen table. The coffee didn't taste the same without the morning light from my old kitchen window, or the faint scent of lavender in the air. But as I held the warm, familiar ceramic in my hands, the small chip pressing into my thumb. I knew something had shifted. This wasn't a relic of a life that was over. It was a reminder of who I was. I was a builder, and I was just getting started. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life. The legal system doesn't move with the speed of anger or betrayal. It moves with the slow, grinding certainty of a glacier. My life became a calendar of deadlines and document requests. Mr. Henderson had warned me that Sarah's legal team, a high-priced firm from the city named Sterling & Croft, would use every tactic to delay and drain our resources. Their first official response to our lawsuit arrived on December 10th, a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered by courier. It was a motion to dismiss, a 40-page document filled with dense legal jargon that essentially called my claim a work of fiction. They argued that the lottery ticket was a gift, that my $20 was an unrelated act of generosity, and that our 22-year marriage was merely a roommate arrangement with no implied financial partnership. Reading those words, I felt a flash of the old, hot rage, but it cooled quickly. It was exactly what Henderson had predicted. They were building a narrative. I was building a case. Our counterfiling was due on January 5th. Henderson and I spent the week between Christmas and New Year's in his quiet, book-lined office. While the world outside was full of festive lights and cheer, we were hunched over tables, surrounded by stacks of paper that represented my life. We attached every piece of evidence: the audio file of the voicemail, the ATM receipt for the $20 withdrawal, copies of 22 years of joint tax returns, the $28,500 wire transfer for Eleanor's surgery, and a signed affidavit from Tom, my mechanic, who confirmed I had mentioned leaving the money for the lottery ticket on his workbench that Friday. Our response was not 40 pages. It was 112 pages of cold, hard facts. We filed it with the court on January 4th, a full day ahead of schedule. The judge denied their motion to dismiss within 48 hours. The glacier had just crushed their first roadblock. Now the discovery phase could begin in earnest. Discovery is a legal term for a process that feels more like an excavation. We were digging through the buried layers of their finances, and the first tool we used was the subpoena. Henderson's office sent out a wave of them, subpoena duces tecum, a formal request for documents. The first went to the State Lottery Commission, requesting all records related to the claiming of prize number 88041927, including the exact date and time the ticket was validated and who was present. The second went to Sterling Bank, where Sarah had opened a new private wealth account on October 25th, the day after the prize was claimed. We requested all transaction records for account number 7822914B since its inception. More subpoenas went to every major credit card company, seeking records for any cards opened in Sarah's name in the last 6 months. We were drawing a financial map, and we knew it would lead us straight to the treasure. While we waited for the documents to pour in, we scheduled the depositions. These were formal, out-of-court interviews, conducted under oath. Their lawyers fought the dates, claiming scheduling conflicts, but the court set a firm deadline. All primary depositions were to be completed by February 15th. Eleanor was scheduled for February 10th, Mark for February 11th, and Sarah for February 12th, 3 consecutive days. Henderson's strategy was clear. Get the supporting characters on record first, lock in their stories, and then confront the main player. People like them, he explained to me, his voice calm and steady, are used to their stories being believed without question. The pressure of a sworn oath often reveals the cracks in the facade. I wouldn't be in the room for their depositions, but every word would be recorded by a court stenographer, creating a transcript that was as legally binding as testimony in a courtroom. The first set of bank records arrived on January 22nd. It was a stack of statements from Sarah's new private wealth account. I sat with Henderson in his conference room, the smell of coffee hanging in the air, and we went through them line by line. The initial deposit on October 25th was for $7,200,000, the lump sum payout after taxes. From there, the money began to move. There was a $1 million wire transfer to a brokerage account in Mark's name on November 1st, labeled Investment Management Fee. A $50,000 charge from a luxury car dealership on November 3rd. A $200,000 transfer to Eleanor's personal savings account on November 5th, labeled Gift. They were treating my half of the winnings like their personal slush fund, but it was a single transaction from October 26th that made Henderson pause. He slid the statement across the polished mahogany table and pointed a finger at a single line item. A wire transfer for $350,000 to a company called Ocean View Realty Holdings, LLC. That name meant nothing to me. But in the world of finance, an LLC is often a shield, a way to hold assets without using a personal name. Henderson's paralegal spent the next 2 days digging. What she found was the linchpin of our case. Ocean View Realty Holdings, LLC, was a shell corporation registered on October 20th, 5 days after we won, but 4 days before, the prize was officially claimed. The sole managing member of the LLC was listed as Mark Peterson, Sarah's brother. The $350,000 transfer was a non-refundable deposit on a $7 million beachfront property in Florida. The purchase agreement was dated October 26th. They hadn't just decided to cut me out after the fact. They had planned it. They had formed a corporation to hide the purchase of a new family palace before the money was even officially in their hands. They had already spent the money from the life they were stealing from me before they had even bothered to tell me I was being thrown out. Henderson leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "This is it, David," he said, his voice low with satisfaction. "This is premeditation. This isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a conspiracy to commit fraud." The cold legal term hit me harder than any insult. Fraud. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had actively conspired to defraud me of what was rightfully mine. The knowledge didn't bring me joy. It brought a profound, chilling clarity. I thought back to those days after the win, when I was still dreaming of a trip to Italy, and they were already on the phone with lawyers and real estate agents, plotting my removal. The entire week of feigned family celebration was a lie. A carefully staged performance designed to keep me docile until they could secure the money and show me the door. That evening, I went back to my small, quiet apartment. I didn't turn on the television or the radio. I just sat at my little kitchen table holding my chipped green mug. I thought about the porch swing I built, the lavender garden, the pencil marks on the wall. They hadn't just taken a house. They had tried to erase a life. They had underestimated me at every turn. They thought the man with grease under his fingernails wouldn't know how to read a bank statement, wouldn't understand a corporate filing, wouldn't have the stomach for a fight. They saw a simple mechanic. They never bothered to look at the engine. They never realized that every part is connected, every action has a consequence, and that if you know how the system works, you can take it apart, piece by piece, and put it back together the right way. The depositions were less than 3 weeks away. I took a slow sip of coffee. I was ready. The first sign that the ground was shifting under their feet came not as a roar, but as a frantic phone call. It was a Tuesday morning, February 1st, a little over a week before the depositions were scheduled to begin. I was under a sedan, my knuckles scraped and covered in fresh grease, wrestling with a rusted exhaust bracket. The shop phone rang, and my mechanic, Tom, answered it. A moment later, his head appeared under the car lift. "David," he said, his face a mixture of confusion and amusement. "It's your wife. She sounds upset." I slid out on the creeper, wiping my hands on a red rag. The cold concrete felt solid beneath my back. I took the phone, the plastic receiver feeling slick with oil. "This is David. What did you do?" Sarah's voice was high-pitched, a shrill, sharp sound I hadn't heard since our son Jake broke his arm falling out of a tree when he was 8. It was the sound of panic. "My cards were declined, David, at the grocery store. And Mark just called me. The accounts are frozen, all of them. What in the world did you do?" I leaned against the cool metal of a toolbox, the familiar scent of solvent and steel filling my lungs. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting her words hang in the air of my garage, a place her expensive shoes had not stepped in for years. "I did exactly what my lawyer advised me to do, Sarah," I said, my voice even and calm. "It's called a legal petition. It ensures the assets from our shared venture aren't moved or spent until the court makes a decision." There was a sputtering sound on the other end of the line. "Our shared venture? Are you insane? I won that money. You have no right." Her voice was cracking now, the carefully constructed composure shattering like cheap glass. "You are trying to ruin my life out of spite," she shrieked. "After everything I've done for you." The sheer audacity of that statement almost made me laugh. Instead, I just said, "Your lawyers have all the paperwork, Sarah. I suggest you talk to them." I hung up the phone before she could reply. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a quiet, grim certainty, like a surgeon who has just made the first necessary incision. The disease had been located. Now it was time to cut it out. They didn't wait long. 2 days later, a gleaming black Mercedes, the one purchased with a $50,000 charge from the frozen account, pulled into my shop's gravel lot. It looked ridiculously out of place next to the rusted pickups and dented minivans. Sarah got out of the passenger side, followed by Mark. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her face was tight with anger. Mark looked like he wanted to punch a hole through my wall. They stormed into the garage, their expensive leather shoes clicking on the oil-stained floor. "We need to talk," Sarah announced, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceiling space. I didn't stop what I was doing. I was meticulously cleaning a set of spark plugs with a wire brush. A delicate, focused task. "I'm working, Sarah." Mark stepped forward, his face flushed. "Don't you play games with us, you old fool. You're going to drop this ridiculous lawsuit right now. You have no idea who you're messing with." He jabbed a finger in my direction. "We will bury you in legal fees. You'll lose this garage, your apartment, everything." I placed the last spark plug down on the clean rag and looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. My gaze was steady. "Threats won't work, Mark. Not anymore." Sarah moved closer, trying a different tactic. She softened her voice, letting a fake tremor of emotion enter it. "David, please," she said, her eyes pleading. "Think about our family. Think about Lily and Jake. Is this how you want them to remember us? Tearing each other apart over money?" It was a low blow, using our children as shields. The memory of her laughing with Mark as I walked out the door flashed in my mind. "I am thinking about them," I said, my voice remaining level. "I'm thinking about the value of a man's word. I'm thinking about what's fair. This isn't about tearing anyone apart. This is a simple accounting of a 22-year partnership." Mark let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Partnership, you fixed cars. Sarah is the one with the vision, the one who is making this money grow. You have no claim to any of it, and you have no proof." He was so arrogant, so utterly convinced of my stupidity, that he couldn't see the trap he was walking into. I picked up the rag and slowly wiped my hands, taking my time. I looked from his smug face to Sarah's anxious one. "No proof?" I asked quietly. Then, I let the silence hang in the air for a beat before I delivered the final, devastating blow. "That's interesting. I wonder what a judge will think of a company called Ocean View Realty Holdings, LLC, registered by you, Mark, on October 20th. I wonder what he'll think about the $350,000 deposit on a Florida beach house made with lottery funds just 1 day after the prize was claimed." The effect was instantaneous. All the color drained from Mark's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Sarah stared at me, her eyes wide with genuine shock. She turned to her brother, a look of dawning horror on her face. She hadn't known. He had been playing her too. For the first time, she saw the full depth of the game, and she saw that I was not a pawn. I was the one who had just flipped the entire board. I turned my back on them and went back to my workbench. "The depositions start next week," I said over my shoulder, my voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute finality. "You should save your stories for the lawyers. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an engine to rebuild." I didn't watch them leave. I just listened to the sound of the Mercedes, tires spitting gravel as it sped away, a sound of panicked retreat. The deposition took place on February 12th, a cold, gray Tuesday. The room was on the 23rd floor of a glass and steel skyscraper downtown, a world away from the smell of oil and antifreeze. It was a sterile, airless space, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that reflected the fluorescent lights from the ceiling like a dark, still lake. I sat on one side with Mr. Henderson, his calm presence, a solid anchor in the tense silence. Across from us sat Sarah, looking smaller and more fragile than I had ever seen her. flanked by her two lawyers from Sterling and Croft. Mark sat a few feet behind them, against the wall, trying to project an air of bored confidence, but his constantly tapping foot betrayed his nerves. A court stenographer sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her machine, ready to capture every word, every lie, every truth. I wore my best pair of khaki pants and a simple blue button-down shirt, the clothes of a man who worked for a living. I felt their eyes on me, judging, underestimating. It was exactly what I wanted. For the first hour, Sarah's lawyer led her through a carefully rehearsed narrative. She spoke of our marriage in the past tense, describing it as a relationship that had run its course. She painted me as a simple, unambitious man, content with my small life, while she had dreams of something more. When Mr. Henderson's turn came, his voice was gentle, almost conversational. He started with the basics. Mrs. Miller, for the 22 years of your marriage, who paid the mortgage on your home on Elm Street? She hesitated. It came from our joint account. And the money in that joint account, Henderson continued smoothly. Where did that come from? From David's business, mostly, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He moved on, laying one brick at a time. The tax returns showing me as the sole provider. The tuition payments for our daughter, drawn from my business account. The $28,500 wire transfer. Do you recall, Mrs. Miller, receiving treatment for your mother's illness in March of 2017? She nodded. And do you recall how that treatment was paid for? She looked down at her hands. David sold his car. Then Henderson slid a small audio player to the center of the table. I'd like to play a voicemail, left for you on Friday, October 15th, at 7:12 p.m. He pressed play. My own voice filled the silent room, a ghost from another life. The $20 for the lottery is on the counter. Could you grab a ticket on your way home? Please use our numbers. Love you. Sarah flinched as if struck. Her lawyer immediately objected, calling it irrelevant, but the damage was done. The words, "our numbers," echoed in the quiet room. Henderson then placed the ATM receipt next to the audio player. And this, Mrs. Miller, is a receipt for a $20 withdrawal made from Mr. Miller's account on the morning of October 15th. The same $20 he mentioned in the voicemail. Her face was pale. The carefully constructed wall of her story was beginning to crumble. This was the moment. Henderson leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her. Mrs. Miller, after claiming the prize, what were your plans for the winnings? She recited a line that was clearly prepared, to invest it wisely, to secure my future. A laudable goal, Henderson said, his voice still soft. Did these investment plans include any significant real estate purchases? Her lawyer immediately interjected. Objection. My client's investment strategies are confidential. Henderson just smiled faintly. I believe they are very relevant to this case. He placed a new document on the table, sliding it in front of Sarah. Are you familiar with a corporation named Ocean View Realty Holdings, LLC? Mark, sitting against the wall, went rigid. Sarah stared at the paper, confused. No, I've never heard of it. That's interesting, Henderson said, because this document shows it was incorporated on October 20th. The managing member is listed as your brother, Mark Peterson. He placed a second document on the table. It was the bank statement showing the $350,000 wire transfer from her account to the LLC. And this document shows a significant transfer from your account to this very corporation on October 26th, just one day after you claimed the prize. Sarah's eyes widened. She shot a panicked, betrayed look at her brother. The final document landed on the table with a soft thud. And this, Mrs. Miller, is a purchase agreement for a $7 million beachfront home in Naples, Florida, signed by your brother on behalf of the LLC. The deposit was non-refundable. The room fell into absolute silence. Sarah stared at the papers, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The lies had unraveled completely, exposing the raw, ugly truth of their conspiracy. She slowly turned her head to look at Mark, her expression a mask of disbelief and fury. He couldn't meet her gaze. His smug confidence had evaporated, replaced by the clammy sweat of a man who had been caught. He had not only conspired against me, but he had done it behind her back, using her as a pawn in his own greedy game. All the power, all the control they thought they had, vanished in that instant. It flowed across the mahogany table to my side, settling not with a roar, but with the quiet weight of undeniable fact. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, my hands resting calmly on the table, the hands they had once scorned, and I watched their world burn to the ground. The settlement came faster than anyone expected. There was no dramatic courtroom battle, no trial. Sarah's lawyers called Mr. Henderson the day after the deposition. They folded. The evidence of premeditated fraud was too damning to fight. We settled for the full $6 million. I heard through the grapevine that the deal on the Florida beach house collapsed, costing them their $350,000 deposit. I also heard that Sarah and Mark no longer speak. Their greed, it turned out, was a fire that consumed their own relationship just as easily as it had consumed mine. They were left with their half of the fortune, but it was tainted by the ugliness of how they'd tried to get it all. My life didn't become a whirlwind of luxury cars and exotic vacations. That was never the point. I bought a modest brick house on the other side of town. It's smaller than the old place, but it has a 2-car garage that's clean, well-lit, and all mine. I invested the money wisely, just as Henderson advised, setting up a trust that will provide a steady, comfortable income for the rest of my days. I even expanded my shop, hiring Tom full-time and buying a new hydraulic lift. The work keeps my hands busy and my mind clear. It keeps me grounded. My mornings still start at 5:30 a.m. with the smell of brewing coffee. The sun comes through a different window now, falling across a kitchen table that has no history, no memories etched into its surface. It's a blank slate. And every morning, I drink from my old green mug, the one with the chip on the rim. For a while after I got it back, holding it felt like holding onto a ghost, a piece of a life that had been amputated. The familiar weight in my hand was a constant reminder of everything I had lost. But sitting here now, in the quiet stillness of my own home, it feels different. The warmth of the coffee spreads through my hands, and I look at that small, familiar chip. It's no longer a scar. It's a mark of survival. This mug went through the fire with me. It was discarded, deemed worthless, and thrown out with the trash. But it endured. It's not a reminder of what was taken from me. It's a testament to what they could never take. My integrity, my resilience, my sense of self. I look out the window into my new backyard. I didn't plant lavender. Instead, I built 3 raised garden beds with my own 2 hands. I'm growing tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. It feels good to put my hands in the clean, dark earth, to nurture something from a seed and watch it grow. It's a quiet, honest kind of work. The money didn't fix me, because I was never broken. It simply gave me the tools and the time to rebuild. They thought my worth was tied to a paycheck, to a house, to their approval. They never understood that a man's true value is in what he builds, what he fixes, and what he refuses to let be broken within himself. And that is a foundation that no amount of money or betrayal can ever tear down. In the end, it was never really about the $12 million. Money is a strange thing. It's like a magnifying glass. It doesn't change who you are, it just makes you more of what you've always been. For them, it magnified a smallness of spirit, a greed that was willing to burn down 22 years of history for a bigger share. For me, it became a tool, not for revenge, but for justice. The greatest lesson in all of this is that dignity has no price tag. You can't buy it, and you can't sell it. They tried to put a $10,000 value on my life's work, but they failed to understand that a person's real worth is measured in their character, in their resilience, and in their ability to look themselves in the mirror at the end of the day and know they did the right thing. That is the only fortune that truly matters, and it's one I will never lose. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what you thought. I really want to know your opinion. Here you will always find stories that move, surprise, and bring lessons to take with you for life.